Oh, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based on where you are joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Laura Chechi Galanos. I am the Executive Manager of the World Stroke Academy, which is the educational platform of the World Stroke Organization that provides stroke education to health professionals worldwide. Now, it is with great pleasure that we are hosting this educational activity today on the future of stroke care, big data insights, and reproducibility, which we decided to organize given the big success of our big data and stroke e-learning module, which is available on the World Stroke Academy site. Now, before I introduce today's moderator and our speakers, we're going to have a quick look at some of our housekeeping rules as usual. We welcome any questions that you might have throughout the webinar, but we kindly ask you to use the Q&A box for those in your Zoom control panel. So not the chat, but the Q&A for questions. You can, of course, use the chat box to say hi, let us know where you're joining us from today, or leave any other comments. A reminder that this webinar is recorded and the recording link will be sent out to all of you via email shortly after the webinar, and it will also be uploaded on the World Stroke Academy site with any other resources related to today's topic. And lastly, we kindly ask you to fill in the evaluation survey at the end to share your feedback with us, your ideas for next webinars, but also to claim your certificate of attendance. We'd like to thank you for all the interesting questions that you submitted. We will consider addressing some of those in a future webinar. During today's webinar, we will answer only the questions about big data and stroke. Now, without further ado, let me introduce today's chair and moderator, Dr. Bindu Menon, Professor and Head of Department of Neurology at the Apollo Hospital, Nellore, India. She's board member of the Stroke Support Organization, research committee member, and Genesis member of the World Stroke Organization. She's an academician, a clinician, a researcher, and also a health activist who is really passionately committed to all the work she does. So, Dr. Menon, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Laura, and greetings to everybody here, and welcome to this webinar today. As we all know that stroke care is undergoing a transformative shift, and this is driven by advances in big data analytics and artificial intelligence. And with the vast amount of patient data that is generated with the electronic health records, imaging, and also now wearable devices, as we all know, that we have the potential to predict the stroke risk. We have the, more accurately, I should say, we can personalize the treatment and can also improve patient outcomes. Now, however, this true impact of this big data in stroke depends on two critical factors, which we will be addressing in this webinar today, is insight generation and reproducibility. So with machine learning models, which are coming now, more and more models which are coming into practice, they can uncover hidden patterns in stroke risk, diagnosis, recovery, rehabilitation, everything. But the challenge lies in translating this into real-world clinical practice. How can I use them into my patient practice? So how do we ensure that these predictive models remain accurate across diverse patients? We see that every patient is different. How do we prevent biases in algorithms? And how do we have models and findings which can be validated across different data sets, I should say, and different institutions as also? So in this session, we're going to explore the challenges and the opportunities in leveraging this big data in stroke care. This is coming up in a big way, and we need to take this beautifully into our clinical practice, and how we can reliably and reproduce this and with ethically sound, because that's also one factor that should be considered. And this should be actionable, this should be equitable, and this should be sustainable, because there are models across, it will keep changing. We welcome you all and hope we have a very engaging discussion on shaping this future of stroke care through this big data and reproducibility. As Laura has just mentioned, kindly put your questions in the Q&A. Kindly do introduce yourself so that we know that whom we are talking to. Now, let me present our first speaker, Dr. Adriana Conforto. She is the co-chair research committee, World Stroke Organization. She's a neurologist and senior researcher at Sao Paulo University, Brazil. We have with us joining today Dr. Ben Bray, Medical Director, Epidemiologist and Principal in the Health Analytics team at Land Clark and Peacock, UK. Dr. Mateus Freitas, Medical Doctor, Mechatronics Engineer, Medical Consultant in Analytics and Big Data at Hospital, Albert Einstein, Brazil. Welcome, three of you, and hopefully we would have a wonderful discussion at the Q&A at the end of session after Adriana's talk. Adriana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Bindu. Thank you for the kind introduction. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to present some of the big data and stroke. I thank all the participants who provided talks to this course, the videos, the WSO and the WSA for all the support. So here are my disclosures. And we'll talk first about the relevance of big data and stroke and address some key concepts and resources. During my talk, I'm going to share some slides that were presented during the course. So if you want to hear more about a particular topic, look at the name of the speaker at the bottom of the slide, and then you can find more information in the course. So we talk about artificial intelligence when a computer solves a task in a way that mimics human behavior. Machine learning is a subset of AI in which algorithms allow computers to learn from examples without being explicitly programmed. And in deep learning, we have biologically inspired neural networks that do not require predetermined inputs. So in order to hear more about artificial intelligence in stroke, about ongoing and future applications, there was this webinar last year. But basically, in order to train artificial intelligence algorithms, we use data. In order to validate them, we also need data. So all the steps are required before an application can be deployed, whether to perform predictions, to aid in decision-making, to facilitate and speed processes during the stroke chain, to help in diagnosis, for instance, by automating imaging analysis, to support prognosis. And having artificial intelligence algorithms can help us identify patients who are more likely to respond to particular therapies, so to deliver personalized care. And then the sources of data, they can be varied. They can be generated by patients, for instance, by means of wearables, such as smartwatches and other devices. They can come from administrative systems, from clinical practice, from electronic medical records, labs, imaging, as well as from registries or clinical studies in research. And this data can be originated locally, but by means of networks, local up to international networks, they can increase in volume and in variety. So just to give an example of how different sources of data can contribute to insights about real world results of a government-funded initiative. So this precise study was done in Australia by Monique Kilkenny's group. So the question that it addressed was, does this government-funded policy improve stroke or TIA outcomes? So there was a policy of providing financial support to primary care physicians who provided structured chronic disease management. And by evaluating data from lots of sources, from different institutions, it was possible to show that this policy was associated with a decrease in mortality. Also in this study, it was possible to assess long-term results that may be challenging under more controlled conditions, not when we are not dealing with real-world data. Another example is the pre-risk study. So here, AI models were used to assess the risk of recurrent stroke by gathering data from several institutions in Spain. So again, this can be used also to encourage patients to assess what are the factors that are impacting the risk of stroke recurrence. And so it has many important implications in clinical practice. And then when we start to think about joining a consortium or a network that will generate big data, it usually starts with the question and in contacting colleagues who are interested in the same topic. So just an example, we have this cerebral venous thrombosis consortium. So CVT is an uncommon cause of cerebrovascular disease. And in the DOAC CVT study from this consortium, the following question was addressed. So in clinical practice, are the rates of venous thrombosis or hemorrhage comparable in patients with CVT treated with DOACs or vitamin K antagonists? So this kind of question would unlikely to be answered by underpowered limited studies. And in the CVT, more than 600 patients from more than 20 countries were enrolled. The results were presented during the WSA in Abu Dhabi last year, indicating comparable results at 6 months of the two treatments. And now the study is going to be continued up to 2 years of follow-up. There are more than 800 patients from different countries registered. So it's also a useful way of building networks to try to answer questions that might be really challenging, and also to answer questions in clinical practice about how things actually happen in clinical practice. So one can ask, well, how big should the data be to be called big data? So there's no formal definition. We can use the term big when the amount of data starts to become a problem for management or for analysis. And we have to keep in mind that real-world data, which are a source of big data, typically is not going to look like data from randomized clinical trials. It's going to be less structured. There will be more missing data. The data can look more messy, but it will reflect more real conditions. However, we have to remember that when the data were not produced with the goal of answering a particular scientific question, we'll call it the secondary use of data, this data may be biased. So just having large sample sizes can increase precision, but to not necessarily reduce bias or improve accuracy. So we have to have tools, to have ways to try to minimize bias when we have big data. And one approach is to use the target trial methodology, just to plan the study as if a randomized clinical trial was being planned. So to define appropriate inclusion and exclusion criteria, what will be the variables that will be collected, what are the outcomes, how will the investigator deal with missing data. So it takes plenty of effort to plan and to analyze. So this approach was using in the PRECISE study that I mentioned before. And also data linkage was used to minimize missing data. So when data from different sources were assessed, there were some outcomes or some variables that could be missing from one source of data, but were present in another source. So by linking data, it was possible to minimize the loss, just the amount of missing data. Another key concept is the need to validate the information. So for instance, if ICD codes are used, sometimes ICD codes are registered by professionals involved in administration who are not involved in clinical practice. So the codes that are registered may not actually reflect clinical diagnosis. So before including this in a project, just to train all the personnel involved in coding. And this actually can be also useful to improve documentation, to improve quality of registration information. And this can be part of a program just of quality improvement, even before any big data study is planned. Also, for instance, if the I-64 is used and stroke not specified, if hemorrhage or infarction, then if this code is used often, if you want to work with this data, you'll probably need to look at other sources such as imaging reports or even the images to be able to extract this information of the type of stroke. So training all the team is really important. Despite all these challenges, there are also many advantages of using real-world data. So then it reflects, it can reflect practice. You can extract population-based information. It's usually less expensive and resource-intensive, and it allows long-term follow-ups that otherwise could be very challenging to assess. But then when we're faced with large amounts of various sources of data, there must be a process to extract and uncover patterns from all these sets of data. So this process is called data mining. And in a CRISP-DM process, it can start with it starts with understanding the problem. And here, the input from stroke professionals is going to be absolutely crucial to provide an understanding of what is the sequence of events, what happens to the patient. Also, how the data are collected, where and when. So sometimes even in the same institution, we have different systems. So one system for an electronic medical record, another system for imaging, another system for labs, another system for administration, and sometimes the systems do not communicate with each other. So there is a need to clean the data, to pre-process, to prepare it so that it can be analyzed. This way, data visualization can also be extremely helpful so that you can actually look at the data and understand what it is about. Then it's required just to transform all the raw data into a reduced set of representative features that capture the essential information from the data. So one task could be to separate the red and the blue dots. It could be, for instance, to identify in brain CTs what is a ischemic stroke, what is an hemorrhagic stroke. So there's a need to extract the features that will allow the task to be carried over. So there are artificial intelligence algorithms like machine learning algorithms and other methods that can be used to extract these features and to select the features that are more important to that model. So there are different data mining algorithms that operate through classification, clustering, and other methods that can be used in this process of data mining. And we have to keep in mind that not always having more data about a given process gives the best results. We have to have the key features, and also it can vary according to different contexts. So for instance, to have a task of segmentation, to tell from a CT scan where is the acute ischemic stroke and where is the brain that is not affected by the stroke. There's a need to pre-process the data, then to extract features before this kind of application can be interpreted and deployed. And then the process of moving the data from one or more sources to a destination where it can be analyzed or used, let's say for prediction or for decision-making, this process is called a pipeline. So here you see an analogy of how we use water in the end. We have to process it, and there are the different sources of water so that in the end it can be useful. And just to give an example of a study that uses a pipeline for managing large sources of data. So this is a rehabilitation study. It's related to brain recovery. The Enigma Stroke Recovery Group, led by Sukley Liu and Paul Thompson, it intends to understand relationships between brain measures and outcomes. So more than 100 researchers share data to provide novel insights that will not be feasible by just running single studies with limited amount of information. And the results of this consortium have really highlighted some novel insights about variables that impact sensory motor outcomes. So measures of overall brain health that can impact sensory motor outcomes after stroke. So something that is really important to build this kind of network is to have consensus about what are the relevant standard outcomes that everybody should be collecting. So even if there are different cohorts, what are the structured standard outcomes that or variables that have to be present in all cohorts so that all this data can be meaningfully combined. And then given the vast amount of information and also MRIs from different scanners, different populations, there is a need to have efficient pipelines just to handle these large volumes of data in a scalable way. So now there are more than 2,000 patients included in the consortium. And then we come to the need of having computer programming to be able to build these pipelines. So basically, I'm using now the word code with a different meaning, just within the language that is used to tell the computer what you want it to do. So learning how to program is essentially like learning a foreign language. So it's very useful to have code just to perform data wrangling, to check, organize, move, analyze the data in a standard way. And so using this automated methods by using the coding, you can improve reproducibility and replicability. So these are two different concepts. Reproducibility is related to the methods, the ability for someone else to reproduce a protocol. So there must be enough information about what was done and what the sequence of the analysis, for instance, or the organization of the data. And replicability relates to the data, just the ability for someone else or you to obtain consistent results given the same protocol. So by using data science principles, we can enhance reproducibility. So the data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And by using code, all this becomes much easier. And also you can share your code, someone else can improve your code. And then we go to big data and open science by sharing code and sharing the data as well. So just to give an example, for that segmentation task, it can be done also on MRIs. So publicly available databases of MRIs can be used in challenges that bring together computer scientists, medical imaging experts to improve the code, to improve algorithms to perform this task better. It can also be used for educational purposes. And now we're having some publicly available databases with clinical and imaging information. For instance, we have the stroke outcome optimization project that allows public assessment of information about demographics, impairments, and MRIs of more than 1,000 patients. But then before sharing data, you have to keep in mind that data pipelines and mining involve the use of sensitive and personal information. So there's a need to ensure privacy and data protection, to assess the informed consent, to provide anonymization and secure data storage. So for instance, by linking data from different sources, sometimes it's possible to re-identify a patient. So there are methods to protect this information to protect the privacy. It can include secure collaboration, output protection, or federated architectures. So for instance, in the Trust Stroke project, a federated architecture was devised so that there are different institutions participating in this project. There are different sources of data. There is even data collected directly from patients, but then the data don't travel from one institution to the other. Only the algorithms are trained at each institution, and the algorithms travel from an institution to the other, but not the data. So this is a way to address these challenges in data privacy. So in regard to some resources, whether you're an investigator or someone involved in stroke care directly, or in administration, in improvement in quality of stroke care, there are some resources to improve coding. And here I'm talking about coding like the ICD. So there are tutorials, there are webinars that can be used to train personnel to enhance the quality, enhance the consistency of the data. There are also many data science resources that are publicly available. These here relate to rehab research, but many of the concepts and the tools that are available on these websites, they are also extend to other areas because they involve data science in general. And actually, you don't need to work with big data to learn this data science principles, to learn some basics of coding. And there is a Repro Rehab initiative, also led by Supliu, that has publicly available data, many tutorials, many videos, so you can go step by step to learn how to organize data, how to manage the information, and how to use automated processes to organize and to analyze it. And this can be applicable even if you don't have large sets of data. It may be actually better to learn with smaller sets before working with large data sets. So by learning all these data science principles, one can make the data more AI-able and make it more valuable to actually get actionable insights that can transform healthcare. But in order to do that, there are some steps that should be taken just to plan in advance, obtain all the ethical approvals, set up secure data transfer and storage, prepare the data, and analyze it. Because in order to have really transformative applications, we need high quality data, we need standardization that will facilitate any harmonization processes that are required. So working with data involves interdisciplinary work, involves building networks of people who can collaborate with each other, having good questions that come from clinical practice, having consensus to define some key outcomes and variables that should be assessed, as well as strict adherence to ethical principles. So I'd like to thank all the speakers, to thank Bindu, Mateus, and Ben for being here with us today. Thank the WSO and the WSA and Laura for all the support, and thank the viewers for being here now. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Adriana. That was a comprehensive overview. We can see that we are getting questions on the Q&A as well. And first, we would like to take up some questions which have been addressed earlier and have been sent to us. So the first question which had come up was, what governance do we have around data credibility? So it goes by what frameworks which are existing to validate and standardize data across different institutions and research settings. Can I request Ben to answer the question, please?
Thank you, Bindu, and nice to meet you all virtually. So there are the question is a very important question, and it speaks to the importance of having data that's captured ideally in some kind of standardized way or terminology, because that makes it more reusable for research, particularly if you're wanting to share data across outside of a local setting, maybe, for example, as part of a network of researchers or nationally or internationally. There are a number of well, actually, there's quite a lot of different sort of standardized terminologies that people can use to capture health data more generally. So you might be aware of, for example, the coding example that Adriana showed talking about ICD-10. There are many other coding schemes available that are designed to help to capture health data systematically. For example, SNOMED is kind of a really very widely used one. And then likewise, within stroke as well, there may be specific terminologies and sort of types, ways of structuring the data that are standardized. I guess probably my recommendation would be that if you're setting up a research initiative or some kind of process for collecting data, one of the early questions it's helpful to ask is, can I make sure the data is collected in a way using an already existing terminology or language or coding scheme? Because that will make it much easier later on when you're trying to analyze the data or share the data with other researchers. And it's much easier to do that at the beginning rather than try and translate your data later on or adapt it to something. So that'd be my recommendation.
Would this over a period of time, whatever the coding is there, isn't it dynamic? So it keeps changing. So would it be difficult for the health professionals to keep track, and how do they do that?
Yeah, so it does. So it does change over time. So, for example, even the big, well-established schemes like ICD-10 change, and many of you will be aware there's a new ICD-11 coming, which has got a different set of codes. It could be challenging to keep up, but it's also to some extent necessary, because as you'll know, if you've tried to use these coding schemes, sometimes it's frustrating because they're often not completely ideal in terms of how they capture clinical phenotypes or things that really matter to you as a clinician. And so there's genuinely an intent to try and make them more useful over time, as well as also to capture changes in clinical practice. So, for example, as new interventions become available or new medicines become available, sometimes new codes, terminologies need to adapt to keep up with the pace of change of medical practice and innovation. So yeah, it does change over time. I guess the advantage of using a standardized terminology is that when it does change, you can just use the new updated codes rather than having to come up with something yourself.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, that does explain. And we have another question posted to us earlier is, are there any big data insights related specifically to physiotherapy? So we know that there can be, Adriana has shown one in a talk as well. Adriana, do you want to answer the question, please?
Yeah, so there are many potential applications. So the Enigma is providing novel insight that can be used to try to personalize therapies to understand different trajectories of recovery and what are the variables that impact these trajectories. And this information may be useful in the future just to personalize which rehabilitation interventions work best for different types of patients. There are at least two other applications. So wearable devices can provide information about what patients are actually doing at home. So usually a physical therapist will give instructions to the patient of what to do, but then cannot be sure whether that information is actually being performed. So just to use the affected limb more often at home. So there are some accelerometers and other devices that are starting to be used to monitor the patients. And I think also in stroke rehabilitation, one of the problems is that the responsiveness of the patients are very difficult. And sometimes it's really hard to choose one method over the other. So personalization of therapy can really make a big change.
Yeah, absolutely. So predictive models, which are patient-tailored, is probably what we are looking at. And That would probably be more helpful rather than it. So we have another question posted again. The last one, which was posted earlier. So this says that, can we use AI software without trust permission for data evaluation using standardized platforms? So there's something with ethical issues. Matthias, can I ask you to answer this question, please?
Yes, sure. First, I would like to start saying that's a great pleasure to be here with you and to contributing and learning from this conversation. For this question, that's the hard question, but truly, we must rely on security and governance and privacy about data, about patient data, that all are sensible data that tells a lot of the way of life of patients, and we must follow strict regulatory and ethical restrictions to use this data. By say that, the standardized platform in general can use anonymized data, but we have to have a previous permission from the patients, like I express permission from the patients to use this data, even in anonymization set. So we can use, as Adriana mentioned, federated learning, where the data is do not leave the institution, the database of the institution, just the software or the script to analyze this data that travel around the world, around the institutions to train models and other type of analysis. And we must rely on institutional policies of governance to care of the keep care of the privacy of this data. So the key factors here is the express consentment of the patient to use their data and anonymization of the data.
Thank you, Matthias. So every institution would have their own way, and I suppose each institution should have their own governance and should have it in written format, so that all of us clinicians should not be blindly going in into using the AI models without permission, because some may not be even aware of how one should be going about. Thank you so much for that. We would like to take up questions which we have in the Q&A box, which have been posted. We have the first question from an anonymous attendee. How can we researchers and clinicians ensure data privacy and security while we deal and leverage big data? Partly it has been answered. If one of you want to take it up, and how one can be more stricter in using up all of these tools. Is there anything that, like 1, 2, 3, 4, that we should be following up? Anyone of you?
I can
Happy
answer
to add
that.
after you, Matthias. Yeah.
No, go on, Ben. Sorry.
I was going to say very briefly, and maybe you'll come onto this as well as your very nice description earlier on. I would say that this is a very technical subject. It gets into the realm of potential sort of legal issues as well as ethical issues. It does vary between countries. So what is applicable in one country may not be applicable in another country with respect to data privacy rules and regulations. And so in summary, if you've got any concerns, I would speak to a local expert who's a specialist in that could provide appropriate advice. And if you're at the stage of thinking, I'm not entirely sure what are the rules regarding data governance, or information privacy or security I need to put in place, I would speak to an expert, and an expert who's local to the legal situation in your country, and also ideally a bit understanding potential some of the technical infrastructure relating to information security in your institution. So I haven't really answered the question, but that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. I suppose this is one of the most important points, because while we are going big and strong in collecting the data and using it, all the platforms, one should be very wary of the legal implications that can happen along with it. Thank you so much for that, Ben. And Michelle asked a question. She wants to move forward that, and I'm interested in understanding current advanced techniques used for data mining in stroke research. Are there any books or any sites that one would want to suggest, you could probably put it in the chat box Q&A there. So I suppose the whole audience on all the participants can go through it. Is that okay? Adriana, Ben, and Mateus, if you could just put in any of the sites which you would be knowing, so the participants can have an understanding of the current advanced techniques which are used for data mining, which is one of the most important aspects again. Dr. Vivek Khandelwal asks, the thoughts on dephasing for non-MRI standard of care for heterogeneous imaging. Adriana, would you want to answer that? Yes.
As for instance, in this SUP project, so really this repository that was published and that is publicly available, dephased was performed on MRI that was just did for clinical practice, not for research. So of course, if you have a more homogeneous imaging, it's easier, but there are ways to dephase to remove all the phase features from the images, because one of the concerns is that by having the information about the faces, it's possible to re-identify, to reconstruct the face. And it's easier if you have more standard data collected for research, but it's also possible for data collected in clinical practice, as was done in this project.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. Quickly taking up the other question so that we don't leave up anything. We have Perrine who is writing, is there a guidance on how to deal with the non-missing at random data, which is frequent data acquired in real-world medical contexts? Example, the vulnerable population often have less documented data. Mateus, you would like to answer the question, please?
Yeah, it depends on the type of study you are doing. If the variable is strictly necessary for your study, you can do some pattern exploration for the whole data set to maybe to infer of this data to if you recognize that it comes from that is the collection of the data is biased, you can discharge rip off this data from your database, or you can do a imputation with some kind of analysis or do a regression to infer what this kind of data should be. And but that's a very hard issue to deal, even mainly this NMR data, missing data.
Thank you, Mateus. There are certain challenges. Now we ask, Corinne asks that since the GDPR rule differs from the country to country, and for example, where EU data cannot be stored on US servers, how do we abide by this rule? Where the data is stored, for how long it can be stored into the system? Who would want to, Ben, you would want to answer that?
I can make a start. So I guess it very much depends on the context. So the country in which you're working, where the data is, the type of data. And again, it somewhat comes back to my answer to the previous question, was it's a very sort of context specific and quite technical question. So you might need to work with a local expert on the local regulations for how to do it. I would say one technique where is increasingly possible are basically analyses whereby the data don't leave the institution or the place where it was generated, and some mechanisms put in place for people to remotely carry out analyses without having either direct access to sensitive patient data, or the data just stays locally and then people are able to analyze it. So an example would be, I think was brought up in the slides that Adriana talked about. So for some of these federated data networks, for example, how they work is the data stays, say, for example, you've got a network of 10 hospitals around the world. The data stays in those 10 hospitals, but they're set up in such a way that a researcher can carry out analysis across all 10, but without having to move the data across national borders, for example, or have access to unanonymized health data. So there are some potential technical solutions that can be put in place to help to reduce some of the legal issues around, for example, GDPR. And it's definitely something to explore. And then likewise as well, there are an increasing number of health data sets that are made available in what we call secure data environments. So the data stays in basically an online platform. Researchers can log in to use the data, but they cannot take the data away. And that also can be a mechanism to facilitate access to sensitive health data while still staying compliant with, for example, GDPR rules.
Thank you, Ben. That explains quite a lot how one can go about it. And I just taking that thread of the answer from there. There's a question from an anonymous attendee who did ask that mention that GDPR is an issue. How can we overcome, which you have partly answered. The anonymous attendee also asked that, do you know how many how can smaller institutions in developing countries participate in big data driven stroke research? So Adriana, you could answer that, how to go about it, where I suppose the rules and regulations are not so clear. Many of the participating institutions do not have a framework. So how do they go about it?
I think it's a little bit of what Ben said before. So in Europe, there be some regulations. In Australia, there are others in Brazil, there are others in the US. So I think is to really start talking to your experts. Who are the local experts? You can also engage the patients community, just explaining sometimes is important to understand how valuable the data can be for the lives of the patients themselves. So I think they are really important stakeholders who should be part of the discussion, to understand exactly that there are ways to ensure privacy and to ensure ethical management of the data that can benefit the patients. Sometimes when we talk about big data, it looks like it's something really bad, like you're just violating privacy. And of course, we need all the regulations, but these regulations will vary according to different perceptions from local places. And I think there are more and more experts about it that can help. I think it's really an interdisciplinary type of work. It's not going to, we're not going to be able to have like a bullet, to be able to answer that.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose we can take one more, Laura. I'd say this. Katrina says that the biggest issue that myself and colleagues are challenged with as modelers based in the EU is access to stroke patient data. GDPR and other restrictions mean that we can't get access to stroke registries and electronic health records and are limited to small data sets, less than 1,000, from mainly clinical trials. How do you see overcoming these challenges of accessing big data sets or stroke registries? Mateus, you would want to answer that?
Yes. One way of to deal with this is to join some kind of federated learning. As Adriana mentioned, you can you don't share data. You can amplify your number of patients by using data from another institutions, but not getting their data. Another initiative, there is some common data models. I cite here like OMOP, the Observational Medical Outcome Partnership. That's a net of institutions that do not share the data, but share the tools to evaluate and to create observational studies. And there are more than, I think, 800 of institutions that use this kind of platform, that analysis. But more difficult to do that, you have to standardize your data. You have to using some common vocabularies like SNOMED. You have to map all your vocabularies, all your terms to a standard vocabulary, and this is a little bit a time-consuming work. So that's some ways to deal with that.
Thank you, Matthias. And I suppose the panelists could also post link to the stroke big data sets available for using remotely via the federated learning. This has been posted by one of the attendees as well. Srijit Radhakrishnan asked that, assuming that access to big data is not an issue, what do you find to be the main bottleneck in making the most of these data? As Matthias has just mentioned, that it has to be interdisciplinary. So where is the bottleneck? Is it the trained analysts or the poor quality of the models, or it is the lack of interdisciplinary teamwork that so Ben or Adriana, one of you want to answer that?
Yes, I think all of them. I think the first of maybe what I see the most is to setting time to plan and to check the quality from the beginning. Sometimes to make that decision, oh, now I want to use the data, but at a point when it was collected in a way that is absolutely not structured, not standardized, and there was no overseeing process to check the quality, because then you'll be in trouble to be able to wrangle all the data, to do all this data mining process. And also, I think it's a communication issue. So we have to learn as stroke professionals or researchers to talk to data scientists. So even if you don't learn how to code or to do computer programming, or you have no time, you have a busy clinical schedule, in order for the data scientists to develop tools and all the methods that have to be done, there has to be an understanding between what you're doing and you understand where he or she is coming from. So I think by learning more about these basic methods, the communication gets much easier, because sometimes someone who is not seeing patients may have a completely different impression of what's going on compared to what I'm doing. So I highlight these two, but I'll leave Mateus and Ben to comment as well.
I completely agree with your points, Adriana, particularly the communication, this interdisciplinary nature of this type of work is really critical. I guess to emphasize the first point is that when you're either setting up a new data collection or thinking about doing a study or an analysis, the importance of being very thorough and structured in thinking it through and documenting it, for example, in the study protocol, is really important, because that will help you to reduce mistakes later on, either in terms of analyzing the data or reporting it correctly. And it's a good opportunity to be working with your colleagues and other multidisciplinary experts in helping to think it through. So that upfront early planning and thinking, and being very clear and specific about what the aim is of a new data collection, the aim of a study, and some analytical methods is really important. And I guess the last thing in terms of the barriers as asked by the questioner is that I think it is probably important to flag that there are resources required to do kind of these data collections, for example, and sort of big research programs, and whether that's time, kind of people, or money, in terms of financial resource for these things, and often that is can be a big barrier in terms of kind of lack of resources, particularly when you're trying to set up a new a new initiative and a project. So, for example, depending on which country you're in, if there's opportunities to connect with research funders, for example, to make sure that try and make sure that your idea is potentially could be funded in the future, is helpful, and then also making sure where there's opportunities to collaborate with existing initiatives or studies, that might be a better and easier route than setting up something completely by yourself, particularly when you're having to find kind of resources for that. So a few other perspectives, but I completely agree with your points, Adriana. Well,
I also agree with Adriana. Sorry, Adriana. I also agree, and all starts at the beginning of the data collection. If you have bad quality at the point of entry of data, it will be hard to extract the value from this data. And another thing that I think is important is the conversation between physician and data scientists to understand. Sometimes the data scientists must understand what is the importance of some variables of and the process in the care of the patient care along the journey, to understand what is important to pick in this data.
May I just add one last comment on that? I know we're not talking about AI today, but I just wanted to say briefly that the world of AI is moving so quickly. If we do this talk in 2 years' time, I'm sure we'll be talking about how people are using AI tools, for example, to analyze data. And so the question around, well, is there issues with having enough analysts to analyze data and those kind of constraints? There may be less of an issue in the future when we've got much better automated tools for example, for writing programming code, for analyzing data. Let's see how things look in 2027, but that would be my prediction.
I'm curious what
Yes.
will be.
Yes, I suppose it won't take 2 years, and it probably might be
Yes,
earlier.
maybe.
Because the speed is too much. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your insightful discussion. So we understand from the discussion that has gone. Adriana, yes?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that some of the questions that came up are answered also by Monique Kilkenny and by Xiaoquian. They could not be here with us today, but they recorded video. So they and Suklyu, because it's so hard to, work around different time zones, they could not join us today, but Laura will make them available on the WSA website as well.
Yes. So I suppose we have addressed all the questions, and that was a very insightful discussion. Adriana, Mateus, Ben, thank you so much for such a insightful discussion, I should say, and where we have also chipped in the AI into, and we know that now it's not just depending on the data, as we understand that it is how we harness it responsibly. That's most important, and that's the first step. It's just not going there, how we enter and keep it. If there are any last comments from all three of you, if not, then I will give the floor to Laura, and thank you for giving me the opportunity as well to chair the session.
Thank you very much for this insightful webinar. It was very interesting to see the discussion and read also all of the questions and comments that were coming in. Because a lot of people asked about the e-learning module, I just wanted to let you know that you can access it on the World Stroke Academy site. The World Stroke Academy is open access. You register with username and password, but there is no fee, and you can go through the 2 modules and then get also your certificate of completion of the course. You can easily access that, and we shared the link in the chat box as well. As Adriana mentioned, I will also add all of the additional questions that had been answered and pre-recorded for you from other course contributors. So we will add those in the resources of the e-learning module in the webinar page. And as always, we just want to thank our speakers for their time, their contribution, our chair and moderator, and all of you for joining today, for logging in and for asking all these questions. There is an evaluation survey that will automatically pop up on your screens now as we close this webinar. We are very happy to receive your feedback about this webinar and any other topics you would like to see in the future. In the meanwhile, you can follow us on our website, on X, and on LinkedIn, where we post all of the upcoming educational activities. Once again, thank you very much for being here today, and wishing everyone a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.